Good evening. I'm Spot On Weather meteorologist Matthew Euler, and welcome to the weekly Teleconnections discussion. This one for the 5th of November, 2021, and there's lots to talk about in tonight's video. So we'll go ahead and kick things off with a look at the Northern Hemisphere 500 millibar height anomalies for today, the 5th of November, 2021. In general, I'll go ahead and brief things from west to east on this particular chart, starting off with an upper level ridge, which is generally building into the central Siberian area, followed by an upper level trough, generally situated off the coast of Japan in this location here. Working our way towards the east, we have an upper level ridge, denoted by these orange colors over the north central Pacific. And that gives way to a downstream trough across the northeastern Pacific and the Gulf of Alaska, denoted by these green and purple colors, followed by another upper level ridge, generally poking up over the western portions of Canada. And then we have a downstream trough across the eastern United States at the present time, followed by a ridge again in the far northwestern Atlantic, south of Iceland. And that then gives way to a trough in cooler temperatures across northwestern Europe. And then we have another fairly significant upper level ridge across central Europe at the present time. So a lot going on with these various waves throughout the northern hemisphere. So let's take a look now at the MJO phases and areas of enhanced convection. Again, as a reminder, the MJO runs from phases 1 through 8. And so each of these numbers represent areas of the equatorial western Pacific, as well as the maritime continent and Indian Ocean. These numbers represent different areas of enhanced upward vertical motion or convection. So let's take a look at the phase diagrams here in a moment. But first I wanted to go into something new this week on the Teleconnections discussion, kind of showing you the infrared or IR satellite imagery across the Pacific Ocean for the 5th of November. Generally, we have an area of low pressure situated off the western coast of Canada with a frontal boundary extending south and then generally southwest across the Pacific Ocean. Additionally, we have areas of convection by these bright clouds here. That generally indicates colder cloud tops. When we talk about infrared, we're talking about measuring temperatures. And so we have these bright white clouds indicative of taller clouds and thunderstorm activity just to the south of Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. Moving further west, just to get you acquainted with the geography out in the western Pacific, this particular landmass is China. We have Taiwan, and then we also have the Philippines. And so in general, we have a small little cluster of convection or upward vertical motion to the west of the Philippines at the present time. But generally, it's fairly quiet across the southwestern Pacific Ocean, the tropical basin out in the Westpac. Now, let's go into the MJO, the Mad-Julian Oscillation. Again, on the left-hand side, I have the temperature composites for the months of November, December, and January, with the blue shading indicative of below normal temperatures, and the orange shadings generally indicate above normal temperatures. So if we look at the months of November, December, and January, generally MJO phases 7, 8, and 1 equate to a lot of blue coloring, don't they? And so that is indicative of below normal temperatures across a large chunk of the United States. Phases 3, 4, 5, and 6, the orange coloring indicative of above normal or warmer than normal temperatures. And so let's go right into the forecast here. Again, here is your MJO phase diagram, ranging from phases 1 and 8, in which we'd have the convection or upper vertical motion over Western Hemisphere and Africa area. If we look at phases 6 and 7, that's generally convective activity over the Western Pacific. 4 and 5, those MJO phases is associated with convection over the maritime continent. And then if we have the MJO in these particular phases in 2 or 3, that equates to upper vertical motion and convection across the Indian Ocean. So that all corresponds again to these particular numbers and where that enhanced upward vertical motion and convection is occurring. So let's start off with the GFS Ensemble forecast, the MJO forecast on the right. And this one goes out through the 18th of November 2021. And pay attention to this green line starting out. Generally, when the forecast is within the smaller inner circle of the MJO phase diagram, that's an association with a null phase and general minimal impacts on U.S. weather. And as we can look at this green line here, all the way out through the 18th of November, the GFS Ensemble forecast is predicting the MJO to remain in this null phase. Looking at the GFS operational model MJO forecast, and now we're paying attention to this lighter blue coloring line. Generally starting out again in the MJO, the null phase, in this inner circle here, the center of the phase diagram, working our way outward towards the edge of the inner circle. And there is some indications according to this GFS operational model. This model also runs out through the 18th of November. There's indications of the MJO working its way into a weaker phase 6 and 7, where we have the convection in the Western Pacific Ocean. But overall, we're looking at a fairly weak to null phase MJO according to the GFS operational model. So again, we'd expect minimal impact on the United States weather right on through the 18th of November. We look at the Navy ESPC MJO phase diagram. Now we're looking at the ensemble mean, this green line. A little bit of a difference, right, between the GEFS, the GFS ensemble forecasting system, the GFS operational, and this Navy ESPC MJO phase diagram. Notice this green line goes into a phase 3, a weaker magnitude phase 4, back out to a stronger magnitude phase 5, where we get more of the convection or that upper vertical motion over the maritime continent region in 4 and 5, and then working its way back into the null phase. Now this MJO, ESPC MJO phase forecast goes out through this one goes out through the 12th of December, so quite some considerable time. Looking now at the La Nina update, looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies in degrees Celsius here, the latest particular chart showing the La Nina quite well with these blue colorings. These are areas of below normal water temperatures across the equatorial eastern and central Pacific. And then we have this horseshoe type shape or horseshoe pattern, which colder temperatures just south of the Hawaiian Islands working their way towards the west coast of the United States. And then we have a large pool of below normal water temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska, the northeastern Pacific. And so this is indicative, this horseshoe shape, of a negative Pacific decadal oscillation. Above normal areas indicated by these orange colors. And you notice this really hasn't changed much in the last 2 to 3 weeks. My last 2 to 3 videos on Teleconnections, we still have this anomalously warm area of water generally over the north central Pacific, extending back southwest into the western Pacific, which is very normal during a La Nina time period, where you get the warmest water out in the western Pacific and the coolest water in the eastern Pacific. Looking at the overall temperature trace line here, showing a definite drop-off in these water temperatures across the Nino 3.4 region. And I'll show in the next slide where exactly that Nino 3.4 region is located. But in general, over the last week, we had a slight drop-off, and then things kind of leveled off here. So you notice this horizontal line, followed by a slight warming, actually. We, earlier in the week, were looking at about a 1 degree Celsius below normal temperature in the Nino 3.4 region. That's actually slightly warmed to minus 0.92, so about 9/10 of a degree Celsius, basically. Looking at the intensity classifications, again, as a reminder, these are the classifications. There's weak La Ninas, 0.5 to 0.9 degrees Celsius below normal anomaly in the Nino 3.4 region. Moderate La Nina between 1 to 1.4 degrees Celsius below normal. The strong La Nina would range from 1.5 to 1.9 degrees Celsius below normal water temperatures right here in this Nino 3.4 region. By the way, the Nino 3.4 region, that's defined by these particular latitude lines and longitude lines. So let's get right into the Teleconnections forecast for this week. Starting off with the Arctic Oscillation, negative Arctic Oscillation here on the left, positive Arctic Oscillation on the right, showing the various synoptic pressure features and generally where they set up between the negative Arctic Oscillation on the left and the positive Arctic Oscillation on the right. In general, with a negative AO, we have cross-polar flow. We have this much colder air that's descending from Canada into the United States. From the Midwest to the East Coast, we get more of a meridional polar front jet stream configuration, allowing the colder air to readily flow southward into the U.S. With a positive AO, we now get more of a west-east highly zonal polar front jet, and the coldest air with a positive AO tends to remain up over Canada and the far northern latitudes, the Arctic region. So let's take a look at the European deterministic AO forecast. Generally showing today on the 5th of November, slightly positive tendency. It will decrease in value, remaining slightly positive right on through the 12th of November. And then it looks like it's going to transition in near neutral conditions. European EPS AO 50 perturb members out through the 20th of November. Look at the green line here. This represents the Ensemble mean. And then this white line represents the European control model. So this is a normal tendency the further out in time we get for these two lines, the white line and that green line, to be farther apart. And that is a measure of confidence. So in the short term, these two lines are fairly close to each other, pretty much on top of each other, out through the 13th of November, but then they kind of spread apart here around mid-month. And that shows high confidence up until the 13th, and then a little less confidence around mid-November. But in general, we're looking at a positive AO on this particular model, transitioning closer towards a neutral after mid-month. European EPS AO 50 perturb members, paying attention to this green line, this forecast. This one goes all the way out to 18 December. General positive tendency through 19 November for the AO on this model run, then close to neutral, potentially slightly positive towards middle December. GFS deterministic AO forecast, generally showing a slightly positive AO, remaining slightly positive through about the 18th of November. There's a little bit of an increase in magnitude here on the 15th mid-month, but then back down. Now the GFS is one of those outlier models on today's runs that's showing a pretty significant drop-off to negative territory by 21 November. So that'd be something to watch. The NSEP GEFS V12 AO 30 perturb members showing a positive AO right on through the 15th of November, transitioning to near neutral to slightly negative. Looking at the North Atlantic Oscillation forecast, the NAO, the differences between the positive NAO phase on the left, the negative NAO phase on the right. The solid dark line represents the jet stream configuration, the main jet axis for the polar front jet stream. So with a positive NAO phase, you get more of a west to east jet stream, milder conditions along the eastern U.S. with a positive NAO phase. And also notice there's no blocking in the high northwest Atlantic into Greenland with a positive NAO phase. Negative NAO phase, we got a much more meridional jet stream configuration, so we get more of a dip in the jet stream that readily allows that colder air to hit into the eastern U.S., and then we get this huge upper level ridge across the northwest Atlantic with blocking generally developing into Greenland with a downstream trough into Western Europe. In fact, with a negative NAO phase, we also tend to see warmer and wetter conditions across the Mediterranean area of Europe, Italy, into Greece, those locations. So let's take a look at the European deterministic NAO forecast, generally showing a fairly neutral NAO for today's date, the 5th of November. And there's a lot of ups and downs with this, right? So if you look at the overall tendency of this, generally we have near neutral conditions if it averages out through the 11th of November, then becoming slightly positive here towards the middle of November. European EPS NAO 50 perturb member forecast showing a positive trend to the NAO, trending slightly negative though by the 12th, the 13th, 14th, right on through the middle part of November, and then trending towards neutral once more after mid-month. European EPS, NAO, 50 perturbed members out through the 18th of December, showing a general neutral trend, slightly positive to start, but then you notice how things remain fairly neutral with this green line through the 5th of December, and then trending more slightly positive after 5 December. GFS deterministic NAO forecast out through the 21st of November, generally showing a lot of downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And then towards the end of this model run on the GFS deterministic, similar to AO, it's showing a more negative turn to the NAO. ECMWF V12 NAO 30 perturbed members, showing a slightly positive phase of the NAO, neutral conditions, and then slightly negative as we get past generally around the mid-month time period of November. For the PNA, Pacific North American forecast, showing you the differences between a positive PNA here in the lower left and a negative PNA in the lower right. And then I have the descriptions here above. Generally with a positive PNA, you generally have a huge upper level ridge and higher heights across the western US, western Canada, even sometimes up into the parts of Alaska with above normal temperatures across that part of the US. In general, we get a downstream trough, much colder temperatures in the eastern US during a positive PNA. With a negative PNA, the pattern flip-flops to where we get an upper level trough across the western US and western Canada, cool and unsettled conditions in that area, and then we get this upper level ridge over the southern US and in the mid-Atlantic with above normal temperatures. So looking at the European deterministic Pacific North American pattern forecast of PNA, this model indicating a slightly positive trend to the PNA on the 5th of November 2021, generally moving towards neutral conditions and then back to positive again after 12 November, right on into the middle of the month. European EPS, PNA, 50 perturbed member forecast out through the 20th of November, generally showing a slightly positive mode to the PNA pattern, transitioning slightly negative, then back positive again after the 10th of November, and remaining slightly positive right on through the 20th of November, according to this model. The European EPS, PNA, 50 perturbed member forecast, showing a positive tendency of the PNA, transitioning slightly negative over the next 48 hours, and then moving back to the positive territory. Now, this will be the interesting thing to watch as we head towards the middle of November. This trend for a return to a positive PNA pattern, which could result in upper level ridge really rebuilding itself over the western U.S. and western Canada with much colder temperatures in the eastern U.S. with a deeper trough. So that one's going to be interesting to watch. GFS deterministic PNA forecast generally showing a positive trend to the PNA today on the 5th of November, and then you see it trending more positive again generally between the 11th and 12th of November, and then back strongly negative according to the GFS deterministic model after the 15th of November. Looking at the ECMWF V12 PNA 30 perturbed member forecast, again, you notice we're slightly positive today. These models are all in agreement on that. Slightly negative turn the 7th and 8th of November, and then look at this rise, this climb again to the positive territory by the 13th of November. And that positive trend tends to last all the way through the 16th before things become neutral again. So this is going to be an interesting period here to watch. And I'll get in my summary here at the end of this presentation, I'll get more into that. Now for the Eastern Pacific Oscillation Forecast, EPO, generally showing you a negative EPO, what it looks like on the left, positive EPO here on the right. In general, across the Northeastern Pacific with a negative EPO, we have a strong upper level ridge or high pressure situated in the Northeastern Pacific into the Gulf of Alaska with low pressure down below that, south of that, near the Hawaiian Islands. Positive EPO, the patterns flip-flop. Now we got a stronger Aleutian low in the Gulf of Alaska with a positive EPO and higher pressure generally to the south in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands. So notice what happens with a negative EPO. We get a much more meridional or bigger dip in the polar front jet stream. We got Arctic high pressure, and that air is directed, that much colder air is directed from Canada into the United States with a negative EPO compared to a positive EPO where we get more of a mild Pacific pattern where the jet stream is more highly zonal or west to east with a positive EPO. Looking at the model forecast for EPO, starting with the European deterministic, generally showing a positive trend of the EPO today on the 5th of November, remaining strongly positive, a magnitude greater than positive 2, right on through the 10th of November, with a transition back towards negative around the 12th of November, and then back up towards neutral, back to negative again. European EPS, EPO 50 perturbed number forecast, showing a positive trend to the EPO today on the 5th of November, and in general, that EPO remains positive until we get closer to around the 14th of November, and then things kind of go back down to the negative territory beyond 14 November. European EPS, EPO 50 perturbed members going all the way out to 18 December for the EPO forecast, showing a positive trend initially, right on through the 15th of November, and then we see a trend, this is interesting here, more of a negative phased EPO beyond mid-month. And that negative phase EPO, this particular European Ensemble prediction system has it negative right on through the 2nd of December. So this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And then the GFS deterministic EPO forecast, positive to start, and then it transitions to neutral before transitioning back positive towards the end of the forecast period between 16 and 21 November. The NSEP GEFS V12 EPO 30 perturbed members, pay attention to the green line here, showing a positive trend to the EPO, transitioning neutral, and then down to negative. Look at this one, the GEFS V12, showing the EPO going significantly negative there from the 13th to the 21st of November. So if I'm looking at this, both the GFS Ensemble and the European Ensemble are showing the general negative trend to the EPO beyond the middle of November. So that will be interesting to see. Those Ensemble models seem to be pointing something out to us. All right. So now moving on to the quasi-biennial oscillation. This is one of those factors we look at. Right now we're sitting in an easterly phase QBO. Whenever the values are negative, we're looking at an easterly phase QBO, a negative QBO. If the values are positive, that's a westerly phase QBO. And so the QBO are basically the stratospheric winds high up above the equator, and you'll notice a lot of ups and downs here from positive phase and negative phase to positive phase and negative phase. Going all the way back to 1960. It's general up and down motion in the phases of the QBO. But in general, when we go to a negative phase QBO, the stratospheric winds over the equator tend to switch direction to easterly, from westerly to easterly. If we were to look at the latest sounding, this is upper air sounding wind plots, generally showing you anything to the left of this zero vertical line here in the center. Anything to the left is negative values. And you notice how this blue line kind of bends back this direction, and then right down to about 50 millibars above the surface. This area is indicative of an easterly QBO phase. From between 10 millibars and 50 millibars, we are on the negative values. We're seeing the negative values. Okay, just a slight sliver of positive values, and it's not very great between 50 and 70 millibars. So in general, this was the radiosonde observation, the RAOB, the zonal winds in meters per second at Singapore. This is in general that location that's utilized to determine whether it's an easterly QBO or a westerly QBO. And just as a reminder, why do we care about this? Well, easterly QBOs tend to favor cold temperatures in the eastern U.S., and they also favor a weakening stratospheric polar vortex in the winter season. and we're expected to remain in this easterly phase, negative QBO, throughout this upcoming winter. Looking at the negative QBO winters, again, if the values range for December, January, and February, if the QBO values were between negative 10 and negative 15. So right now, again, like I said last week, we're sitting at about negative 12, negative 13. Look at the blue. This particular chart represents a temperature anomaly chart in degrees Celsius at the surface. And look at the blue and the purple shading pretty much from the upper Midwest to the East Coast. So we have colder than normal December, January, and February periods when the QBO ranges between negative 10 and negative 15, and we have warmer than normal conditions across the western U.S. So much colder in the east, milder in the west. So if I were just to look at this in general, that would be indicative potentially of a weaker stratospheric polar vortex, and that would be directing the much colder air from high to low latitudes right into the eastern U.S. Right, speaking of the polar vortex, let's take a look at the temperatures at 10 millibars. These are the temperatures. The coloring indicates anomalies in degrees Celsius of the temperatures. 10 millibars, well high above the Earth's surface. I believe it's about 18 miles above the surface. Green and blue coloring indicates much colder stratospheric temperatures. The orange shading much above normal stratospheric temperatures. And if you look at the scale here on the right, the warmer colors again indicate warmer than normal temperatures in the stratosphere. The cooler colors, the blues and greens and the purples, indicate below normal temperatures in the stratosphere. So at the present time, the polar vortex is situated over the Arctic areas where we'd expect it to be. In general, we have the warmest stratospheric temperatures to the west of the vortex. And then over time, now this is today on the left. This is the 15th of November. I just wanted to show you kind of like a snapshot of what's coming up. So you notice this area today, by the 15th of November, now we got much colder stratospheric temperatures denoted by this green coloring. That is generally, this is resulting in a stronger polar vortex. These temperatures are cooling in the stratosphere. If you want a weaker polar vortex, you want these orange colors and warmer temperatures to move into the stratosphere up here at the higher latitudes. Looking at the European polar vortex forecast, very similar. This is today. Matches up quite well with the GEFS model, as well as a placement of these cooler stratospheric temperatures into the Pacific. And then this is the 15th of November according to the European model, again showing a return to cooler temperatures in the stratosphere at the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere, and a strengthening polar vortex through mid-month. Then the polar vortex update. This is the GFS Ensemble forecast system. This is today, 5 November 2021, showing the, again, similar placement of the warmer than normal stratospheric temperatures, as well as the cooler than normal stratospheric temperatures in the green over the Pacific Ocean. And then, again, here's your vortex, generally at 10 millibars, 18 miles above the surface. In the stratosphere, you're looking at cooling stratospheric temperatures, a strengthening polar vortex. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at the European Ensemble prediction system. Just general, what we're looking at the 500 millibar level, the anomalies associated with that 500 millibar level. Basically between today, actually we're going to go to Sunday, the 7th of November is up here in the upper left. And then this is the 9th of November, this is the 13th of November, and then this lower right graphic is the 16th of November. So in general, the blue shadings, again, are indicative of troughs, upper level troughs, areas of cooler than normal temperatures, and then generally the orange shading indicative of upper level ridges, areas that tend to be warmer than normal. Okay. So starting with today on the European EPS, we have a trough, an upper level trough positioned off the Carolina coast, and this is going to kick off a pretty decent storm system at the surface, this upper level trough. Going to get a pretty good storm system to form this weekend. It's moving up the east coast, just off the mid-Atlantic, and there's going to be quite a bit of wind over parts of eastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia due to this strengthening low pressure system, this coastal storm. Back to the northwest over the central U.S. On Sunday, the 7th of November, we have this upper level ridge. And then upstream of that over the Gulf of Alaska, well, look what we got. We still got that trough, that green shading there indicative of anomalously lower than normal 500 millibar heights. Over here, let's see how things progress on the right side, upper right panel. On the 9th of November, this is Tuesday, that trough moves generally to the east, closer to the west coast of Canada and the Pacific Northwest of the United States. The jet stream tends to become more zonal by Tuesday. By Saturday, the 13th of November, we've got a deeper trough now developing in the central U.S., the Midwest, and now we're starting to see upper level heights rise across the western U.S. into western Canada. So these building upper level heights, that amplifies the trough downstream. And then bottom right shows the 16th of November, the trough is generally situated over the eastern U.S. And we also have an interesting building of upper level ridge south of Greenland in the North Atlantic, potentially by the 16th of November. For the GEFS Ensemble forecasting system, very similar, trough off the eastern U.S. coast. On Sunday the 7th of November, another trough in the same location, northeastern Pacific, with a ridge across the central U.S. And then that ridge generally migrates to the east coast by Tuesday the 9th of November, according to the GEFS Ensemble forecast. That's going to result in much milder temperatures Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday across the eastern U.S. It's been a very chilly week this week, but those chilly temperatures will be replaced as this upper level ridge builds in with much milder air. And then you see what's happening here. We talked about that positive PNA, negative EPO pattern possibly. Look what's happening here. These heights are building. This ridge is building. It's getting stronger over the western U.S. and western Canada with the downstream trough. And then by the 15th of November, look, the most unsettled and coolest temperatures are back over New England down to the mid-Atlantic. All right, so speaking of temperature anomalies, let's take a look at this briefly. This was the temperature anomalies. These are the projected temperature forecast anomalies, actually, in degrees Fahrenheit. So by, let's see, this would be 12 November. So this would be next Friday. Look at how mild, how much above normal the temperatures are going to be over the eastern U.S. by next Friday, the 12th of November. We're looking at anywhere on the order of 13 to 17 degrees above normal for a large swath of the eastern U.S. by next Friday. Now there's going to be a strong cold front situated generally here at this location over the Midwest, working its way east. So we have milder temperatures ahead of that surface cold front. Now what happens after that surface cold front moves through? We get a deeper trough across the eastern U.S. by Monday the 15th of November. And look at how much cooler below normal now these temperatures are, on the order of 14 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. And look at Florida, up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit below normal by Monday, the 15th of November. So a real interesting switch in the temperature patterns between Friday, the 12th of November, and Monday, the 15th of November across the east. Looking at October here on the left, what we've seen for October 2021, look at how mild it was, generally east of the Rocky Mountains, especially upper Midwest and the Ohio River Valley in New England, Mid-Atlantic. It felt like an extended summer there in October. And now let's take a look at what we have seen in November, the first 4 days so far. I mean, look at this, green and blues everywhere, Midwest to the East Coast. So what a big switch here. Very mild in October and now pretty chilly here in the first few days of November. So here are my final thoughts on tonight's video. The MJO is currently in a null phase. We looked at that we're expecting minimal impacts to U.S. weather. La Nina conditions continue across the equatorial eastern Pacific. We're looking at about a 9/10 of a degree below normal water temps in the 3.4 region. 9/10 of a degree, that's it. And La Nina in general favors mild temperatures across the mid-Atlantic for the upcoming winter season. That's usually what it does represent. Sea surface temperature anomalies, again, in summary, cooler than normal water across the Gulf of Alaska, with warmer than normal waters over the north central Pacific Ocean. We still have that negative or cold phase PDO with the coolest temperatures along the U.S. West Coast and into the Gulf of Alaska. And that generally favors milder temperatures across the southeastern and mid-Atlantic U.S. Models are generally indicating a slightly positive to a neutral trend in the AO, the Arctic Oscillation, through the 20th of November. And with that, we'd expect near average temperatures across the eastern U.S. based on AO. Based on the NAO forecast, models indicating a neutral trend in the NAO through the 20th of November. Again, that would indicate near average temperatures across the eastern U.S. So it doesn't look like the AO and NAO are really going to play much into milder or colder temperatures right on through about the 20th of November. Models, now these are the two big ones I believe this week, once again, very similar to last week. So with the models now indicating a positive PNA, it's going to transition near neutral, but just briefly, and then it's going to go back to positive between the 15th and the 20th of November, that PNA. So with that, we'd expect overall above normal heights, upper level ridge over the western U.S. into western Canada, with a lower than normal heights and cooler temperatures across the eastern U.S. And really that targeting period, again, is 15 to 20 November. Models are also indicating a negative trend in the EPO after 15 November in general, and that would also equate to colder than normal temps across the eastern U.S. in that same time range, 15 to 20 November. Models are also indicating a strengthening stratospheric polar vortex into middle November, and if that vortex remains strong, the coldest air will remain over the high northern latitudes into the Arctic region, with milder temperatures across the U.S. with a stronger polar vortex. So the overall assessment, and tonight to conclude the video, the Pacific Teleconnections, I really believe the positive PNA right beyond mid-November and that negative EPO beyond mid-November, those will be the main impactful teleconnections. So the Pacific side is definitely the dominant side for teleconnections through the 20th of November. Initially, as the PNA trends towards neutral temporarily, the EPO trends towards neutral temporarily, we get milder temperatures between 9 and 12 November. But those milder temperatures will be replaced by trough and cooler temps in the eastern U.S. Between the 14th and the 20th of November. Really, the 14th of November looks like a transition day as a strong cold front moves across the eastern seaboard out to the western Atlantic. The Matt-Julian Oscillation, MJO, NAO, and AO, they look to have minimal impacts on the overall pattern. And then the QBO remains in the easterly negative phase, which we'll continue to watch closely to see how that plays into upcoming winter weather. And La Nina is on the upper end of the weak intensity or classification. All right, so that wraps things up tonight on the weekly teleconnections discussion. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. This is an action-packed video with a lot of great information. Just, again, hope everybody is learning as much as possible when I do these videos. I'm certainly glad that you're watching this. Very thankful for your subscription. And the best part about this is this detailed analysis is absolutely free. I just do it for the love of weather and for the love of sharing the weather with you, wherever you're watching the video on the Spot on Weather YouTube channel. Okay, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching tonight. Take care, God bless, and until next time, this is Spot on Weather.